The Night Hope died twice. The hallway is narrow, too narrow for the crowd that is pushing through it. The lights are harsh, fluorescent, institutional, the kind of lighting that flattens everything, that makes the moment feel both hyper-real and somehow distant, as though you are watching it happen from outside your own body. Robert Francis Kennedy is moving through this hallway. He is surrounded by people, supporters, staff, security, journalists. There is excitement in the air. There is the electricity of victory. He has just won the California primary. The path to the presidency, which had seemed impossible just months ago, now seems tantalizingly real. He is exhausted, profoundly so. The kind of exhaustion that goes beyond simple physical fatigue and becomes something existential. He has been campaigning relentlessly for months. He has given speech after speech. He has shaken thousands of hands. He has smiled when he wanted to collapse. He has performed hope when he was carrying grief. But in this moment, there is genuine joy on his face. Not the performed joy of political theater, but something real. Something that suggests that perhaps, just perhaps, the impossible might become possible. That perhaps he might have the chance to continue what his brother started. That perhaps he might be able to heal a nation that seems to be tearing itself apart. The crowd is pressing in around him. People want to touch him. They want to shake his hand. They want to be close to him. There is a kind of desperation in their reaching, as though he represents something precious, something that might slip away if they do not hold on to it. He is moving toward a press conference. The staff has arranged it. The journalists are waiting. There is protocol to be followed, statements to be made, the machinery of political communication that must continue even in moments of triumph. The hallway is crowded. The lights are harsh. The moment feels suspended, as though time has slowed down, as though the universe is holding its breath. What Robert Kennedy does not know, what no one in that hallway knows, is that they have seconds left, that the future that seemed so bright moments ago is about to be extinguished, that the hope that was filling that space is about to be replaced with something unspeakable. They do not know that history is about to repeat itself in the cruelest possible way, that the Kennedy family, which has already experienced unthinkable tragedy, is about to experience it again. That America, which is still grieving the loss of one Kennedy, is about to lose another. They only know that this is a moment of victory. This is a moment of possibility. This is a moment when the future seems limitless. They do not yet know how final this moment will be. To understand what happened on June 5th, 1968, we must first understand the journey that brought Robert Kennedy to that hallway. We must understand the transformation that he underwent in the years between his brother's assassination and his own decision to run for president. We must understand what he was carrying, what he was seeking, what drove him forward even when forward motion seemed impossible. November 22nd, 1963 did not just kill John F. Kennedy. It shattered Robert Kennedy. He was not simply losing a brother, though that would have been devastating enough. He was losing his closest ally, his political partner, the person who had defined much of his adult identity. Jack and Bobby had been a team. They had operated in tandem. They had shared a vision, however imperfect, of what America could become. And suddenly that partnership was gone. Suddenly Robert was alone in ways that he had never been alone before. The grief that followed was profound and transformative. In the months after the assassination, Robert Kennedy retreated from public life. He was quiet. He was withdrawn. He was processing a loss that seemed almost impossible to process. Friends reported that he seemed fundamentally changed, as though something essential had been stripped away from him. He read philosophy. He read poetry. He sought comfort in literature, in the words of great thinkers who had grappled with questions of suffering and meaning and loss. He was searching for something, a way to understand, a way to continue, a way to find purpose in a world that suddenly seemed empty of meaning. What emerged from this period of grief was a different Robert Kennedy. The man who had served as his brother's attorney general had been tough, sometimes ruthless, focused on power and strategy. But the man who emerged from grief was softer, more empathetic, more attuned to human suffering. He had been broken, and in that breaking, something had opened up inside him. A capacity for compassion that had perhaps always been there but had been covered over by the machinery of political ambition. He began to travel to poor communities. He went to Appalachia and saw poverty that shocked him. He went to migrant labor camps and witnessed conditions that seemed incompatible with the America he thought he knew. He listened to people who had been ignored by the political establishment. He heard their stories of struggle and survival. And slowly, gradually, he began to develop a political vision that was different from what had come before. He began to talk about poverty and injustice in ways that went beyond standard political rhetoric. He began to articulate a vision of America that was more inclusive, more compassionate, more focused on the marginalized and the forgotten. This transformation was not strategic, it was genuine. It emerged from his grief, from his processing of loss, from his recognition that life was fragile and that power should be used to alleviate suffering rather than to accumulate more power. By 1968, when the country was being torn apart by the Vietnam War, by racial violence, by political turmoil, Robert Kennedy had become something unusual in American politics. A wealthy, powerful man who genuinely seemed to care about the powerless. A politician who spoke about justice, not as an abstraction, but as a moral imperative. In March 1968, Robert Kennedy made the decision that would define the final months of his life. He announced that he would run for president. The decision was complicated, controversial. Some saw it as an act of courage, stepping forward when the country needed leadership. Others saw it as opportunistic, challenging a sitting president from his own party, fracturing the Democratic coalition. But for Robert Kennedy himself, the decision seems to have been less about political calculation and more about a sense of moral obligation. The country was suffering. Young men were dying in Vietnam. Cities were burning. The political establishment seemed incapable of addressing the crises that were tearing America apart. And he believed, perhaps naively, perhaps arrogantly, but genuinely, that he could make a difference. That he could be a voice for reconciliation, that he could heal some of the divisions that were threatening to destroy the nation. The campaign that followed was remarkable. He drew enormous crowds. People came out to see him not simply as a politician, but as something more, a symbol of hope, a connection to his martyred brother, a possibility that the nightmare of the 1960s might somehow be transformed into something better. He campaigned in poor neighborhoods and on college campuses. He spoke to Black communities still reeling from the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Just weeks before, he spoke to white working-class voters who felt abandoned by the political system. He tried to build a coalition that crossed the divides that were fracturing America. The speeches he gave during this campaign were unlike typical political rhetoric. They were passionate, emotional, often improvisational. He quoted poets and philosophers. He spoke directly about suffering and injustice. He did not offer simple solutions or easy answers. Instead, he asked Americans to recognize their shared humanity, to acknowledge the pain that was all around them, to commit to building something better. And people responded. The crowds grew larger. The energy intensified. There was a sense, however fragile, that something significant might be happening, that this campaign might actually represent a turning point, a moment when America could choose a different path. But there was also darkness. There were threats. There were warnings from security personnel that the campaign was taking too many risks, that Robert was too accessible, that the crowds were too large and too unpredictable. The memory of Dallas was never far from anyone's mind. The recognition that violence could erupt at any moment was constant. Robert Kennedy himself seemed aware of the danger. In private conversations, he spoke about the possibility of assassination. He seemed to carry with him a kind of fatalism, a sense that if it was going to happen, it would happen, and that living in fear would mean not living at all. By June 1968, the California primary had become crucial. It was a large state, a diverse state, a state that could determine the trajectory of the campaign. If Robert Kennedy could win California, he would have momentum heading into the Democratic convention. If he lost, his candidacy would be severely damaged. He campaigned relentlessly across the state. He visited cities and small towns. He spoke to farm workers and college students. He appeared at rallies and gave speeches in settings ranging from union halls to outdoor stadiums. The schedule was punishing, the demands enormous. He was running on very little sleep. His staff was concerned about his health. about his ability to sustain this pace, but he pushed forward. There was an urgency to his campaign, a sense that time was limited, that this moment mattered in ways that went beyond normal political contests. The crowds that came to see him were extraordinary. There was an intensity to their response that went beyond typical political enthusiasm. People wept when they saw him. They reached toward him as though he could somehow save them from the chaos and violence that seemed to be consuming the country. There was a kind of desperation in their hope, a recognition that he might be one of the last chances to redirect America toward something better. On the night of June 4th, as the primary results came in, it became clear that he had won. California had chosen him. The path to the nomination was not guaranteed, but it was now genuinely possible. The momentum was building. The coalition he had tried to construct, crossing racial and class lines, seemed to be holding together. There was celebration at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, where his campaign had set up headquarters. Supporters filled the ballroom. There was music, laughter, the atmosphere of victory. After months of grueling campaigning, after the uncertainty and the exhaustion and the constant pressure, there was finally a moment of pure joy. Robert Kennedy arrived at the hotel late in the evening. He was tired but energized by the victory. He had prepared a speech. He would address his supporters, thank them for their commitment, outline the path forward. It was the kind of routine political moment that happens countless times in every campaign. But this moment would not be routine. The ballroom was packed. Supporters were pressed against each other, holding signs, cheering, creating the kind of chaotic energy that characterizes political victory celebrations. The heat was intense. Too many bodies in too small a space, the air conditioning inadequate for the crowd. Robert Kennedy made his way to the podium. The crowd erupted. There was applause, shouting, the kind of genuine enthusiasm that cannot be manufactured or performed. These were people who believed in him, who had invested their hope in his candidacy, who saw in him the possibility of national redemption. He spoke for about 5 minutes. The speech was gracious, hopeful, forward-looking. He thanked his supporters. He acknowledged the work ahead. He spoke about healing the divisions in the country. He quoted Aeschylus, the Greek tragedian whose words about suffering had comforted him after his brother's death. Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart until, in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God. It was a speech that captured who he had become. Not simply a politician seeking power, but a man who had been transformed by grief into something more compassionate, more aware of human suffering, more committed to using whatever power he might achieve to alleviate that suffering. When he finished speaking, the crowd cheered again. He smiled. He waved. He seemed genuinely happy in that moment, genuinely hopeful about the future. And then he began to leave the podium. The plan was to exit through a service hallway that led to a press conference room. It was a shortcut, a way to avoid the massive crowd in the ballroom. His staff led him toward the exit. Security personnel tried to create space in the crush of supporters who wanted to get close to him, to touch him, to be part of this moment. The hallway was narrow, fluorescent lights, industrial kitchen equipment lining the walls. It was not the kind of space designed for crowds, but crowds had pushed into it anyway. Hotel workers were present, along with supporters, journalists, campaign staff. There was noise, confusion, the press of bodies trying to move through a space too small for all of them. Robert Kennedy moved through this hallway. He was shaking hands. He was smiling. He was performing the rituals of political connection that he had performed thousands of times before. There was no indication that anything was wrong. There was no warning that the next few seconds would change everything. What happens next occurs in fragments. In the memories of witnesses, the moment does not flow smoothly. Instead, it breaks apart, becomes a series of disjointed images and sounds that don't quite connect into a coherent narrative. There is the sound first, not recognizable as gunfire initially, more like balloons popping or firecrackers, something that doesn't immediately register as dangerous. The acoustics of the hallway are strange, bouncing sound in unexpected ways. And then there is movement, sudden, chaotic movement. Bodies lunging, people falling, screaming. the realization spreading through the crowd like a wave. Something terrible has happened. Something unspeakable is occurring in real time. Robert Kennedy is on the floor. People are surrounding him. His aides are crying out his name. There is blood. There is chaos. The orderly world of moments before has dissolved into something nightmarish, something that cannot be real but is undeniably happening. Ethel Kennedy, his wife, who had been following behind him, pushes through the crowd. She is trying to reach him. She is calling his name. The desperation in her voice is raw, unfiltered, the sound of someone watching their worst nightmare materialize in front of them. People are trying to help. They are trying to do something, anything. But there is confusion about what to do. The hallway is too crowded. Emergency personnel have not yet arrived. The seconds are stretching out, each one an eternity, each one another moment of irreversible damage. Someone is shouting that they've caught the shooter. There is anger, rage, the desire for immediate revenge. People are struggling, fighting, the violence spreading outward from the initial act. But attention keeps returning to the figure on the floor. To Robert Kennedy, who just moments ago had been standing at a podium speaking about hope and healing, and who now lies motionless, his life bleeding away in a service hallway of a Los Angeles hotel. Witnesses will later struggle to describe what they saw. Their accounts will be contradictory, fragmented, incomplete. Trauma does this. It disrupts the normal process of memory formation, creates gaps and inconsistencies, makes the experience difficult to narrate in any coherent way. What remains consistent across all the accounts is the sense of shock, the sense that reality itself has fractured, the sense that something impossible has happened. Not impossible in the sense that it couldn't happen, because clearly it could and did, but impossible in the sense that it should not happen. That the universe should not allow this kind of repetition, this kind of cruel symmetry. Paramedics arrive. Robert Kennedy is moved onto a stretcher. The crowd parts to let them through. The journey from the hotel to the hospital is marked by a terrible silence. Not literal silence, because there are sirens and shouting and the mechanical sounds of emergency response, but a psychological silence. A sense that everyone present is holding their breath, waiting to know whether this is survivable. At the hospital, doctors work with desperate intensity. But even as they work, there is a recognition among them that the damage is catastrophic. The bullet has entered his brain. The injury is almost certainly fatal. What remains is not a question of whether he will survive, but a question of how long the transition from life to death will take. For 26 hours, he remains alive. His family gathers. His children are brought to see him. The vigil is quiet, private, marked by the rituals of Catholic prayer and the simple human act of being present with someone you love as they die. The nation, meanwhile, is experiencing a kind of collective trauma. News of the shooting has spread rapidly. Television coverage is constant. People are gathering around screens, waiting for information, hoping for a miracle that seems increasingly unlikely. There is disbelief. How can this be happening again? How can another Kennedy be struck down by an assassin? How can the pattern repeat with such cruel precision? The questions are not really questions. They are expressions of anguish, attempts to articulate something that seems to defy comprehension. When Robert Kennedy dies in the early hours of June 6, 1968, the announcement is met with a kind of numb acceptance. The worst has been confirmed. The hope that had been flickering for 26 hours has been extinguished. Another Kennedy is gone. Another leader has been taken by violence. Another moment of possibility has been foreclosed. The funeral is held at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. It is a massive event. Politicians, celebrities, ordinary citizens who have come to pay their respects to a man they believed represented something precious. The service is solemn, marked by eulogies that struggle to find words adequate to the moment. Ted Kennedy, the last surviving brother, delivers a eulogy that captures something essential about what Robert had become. My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it. The words are simple, understated, but they convey the transformation that Robert Kennedy had undergone. From political operative to something more human, more compassionate, more focused on alleviating suffering than on accumulating power. After the service, his body is transported by train from New York to Washington for burial at Arlington National Cemetery near his brother. The train journey becomes a kind of mobile memorial. All along the route, people have gathered to watch the train pass. They stand by the tracks, working-class people, black and white, young and old, holding signs, crying, paying respects to a man who they believed had seen them, had understood them, had cared about their struggles. The images of this train journey are haunting. They capture something about what Robert Kennedy had meant to certain communities. He was a wealthy man from a privileged family, but somehow he had connected with people who had very little, who had been ignored by the political establishment, who had seen in him the possibility that someone in power might actually fight for them. When he is buried at Arlington, the grave is marked with a simple white cross. An eternal flame burns nearby, the same flame that marks his brother's grave. The symbolism is almost too heavy to bear. Two brothers, both struck down by assassins, both buried in this national cemetery, both transformed by death into symbols of lost possibility. The man who shot Robert Kennedy was arrested immediately. His name was Sirhan Sirhan, a Palestinian immigrant who apparently held grievances related to Kennedy's support for Israel. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. The official narrative was straightforward: a lone gunman motivated by political anger. But as with his brother's assassination, questions emerged. Inconsistencies in the evidence. Witnesses who reported seeing things that didn't align with the official account. Forensic details that seemed problematic. The trajectory of bullets, the number of shots, the position of the shooter. Conspiracy theories developed, just as they had after Dallas. Some suggested that Sirhan had been programmed, that he was not acting of his own volition. Some suggested that there had been a second shooter. Some suggested that forces larger than one angry individual had orchestrated the assassination. The truth, as with Dallas, remains contested. Official investigations have concluded that Sirhan acted alone, but doubts persist. The Kennedy family itself has been divided on the question. Some accept the official account. Others believe that critical questions remain unanswered. What is not contested is the impact of the assassination. Coming just months after the murder of Martin Luther King Jr., coming 5 years after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy's death seemed to represent something catastrophic about America in the 1960s. It seemed to suggest that the forces of violence were stronger than the forces of hope, that leaders who advocated for change and justice would be struck down, that progress was not inevitable, but profoundly fragile. What would have happened if Robert Kennedy had lived? This is a question that historians and political analysts have debated for decades. Would he have won the Democratic nomination? Would he have defeated Richard Nixon in the general election? Would his presidency have been successful? The honest answer is that we cannot know. Counterfactual history is inherently speculative. We can imagine different outcomes, but we cannot know what would actually have occurred. What we can say is that Robert Kennedy represented a particular political vision, one that combined a commitment to social justice with an ability to connect across racial and class divisions. He was able to draw support from Black communities and white working-class voters, from young idealists and traditional Democrats. This coalition was rare and perhaps unique. Whether he could have held that coalition together, whether he could have successfully governed, whether he could have achieved the transformations he advocated for, these remain open questions. Political reality is complex. The forces arrayed against change are powerful. Even the most well-intentioned leaders face constraints that limit what they can accomplish. But what is not speculative is the sense of loss, the sense that something precious was taken away before it could fully develop. The sense that a particular moment of possibility was foreclosed not by political defeat or policy failure, but by violence. The 1960s, which had begun with such optimism, with the election of a young, dynamic president who spoke about new frontiers and unlimited possibilities, ended in a very different place. 3 major assassinations, an unpopular war that was tearing the country apart, cities burning, political turmoil, the sense that America was coming apart at the seams. Robert Kennedy's assassination became a symbol of this larger collapse. It represented the death not just of an individual, but of a particular kind of hope. The hope that political leadership could actually address the deep problems facing the country, that change was possible through democratic processes, that violence was not the inevitable outcome of political conflict. For the Kennedy family, Robert's assassination was almost incomprehensible in its cruelty. To experience one such loss is devastating. To experience it twice in such similar circumstances seems almost designed to break people entirely. Ethel Kennedy, who had already supported Jacqueline through the trauma of Dallas, now had to navigate her own version of the same nightmare. She had 11 children, one of whom was born 6 months after Robert's death. She had to find a way to continue, to raise her family, to process her grief while performing the strength that the situation demanded. Ted Kennedy, the last surviving brother, carried a burden that is difficult to fully comprehend. He had lost 2 brothers to assassins' bullets. He was now the keeper of the family legacy, the one who had to carry forward the Kennedy name. The pressure of this position would shape and, in many ways, damage the rest of his life. And for the country, the repetition itself was traumatizing. It suggested that the violence was not an aberration, but a pattern. It suggested that leaders who advocated for change would be killed. It suggested that hope itself was dangerous, that investing in political possibility left you vulnerable to devastating loss. The trauma of the 1960s, the repeated assassinations, the war, the civil unrest, would shape American politics for decades. It would create a kind of collective cynicism, a distrust of institutions, a sense that the system was fundamentally broken. The optimism of the early 1960s would be replaced by something darker, more pessimistic, more focused on individual survival than collective transformation. What does Robert Kennedy's assassination teach us? What lessons can be drawn from this moment of violence and loss? Perhaps the most fundamental lesson is about the fragility of political progress. Change does not occur through some inevitable historical process. It occurs through the efforts of specific individuals, working in specific contexts, making specific choices. When those individuals are removed through assassination, through defeat, through circumstance, the possibility of change is damaged or destroyed. Robert Kennedy represented a particular political vision at a particular moment. His death did not just remove one individual from the political landscape. It removed a specific possibility, a specific coalition, a specific approach to addressing the problems of the 1960s. We cannot know what would have happened if he had lived, but we can recognize what was lost. Not just a life, but a moment of political possibility, a chance to address the deep divisions that were tearing America apart, an opportunity to build the kind of inclusive coalition that has remained elusive in American politics. What his assassination also reveals is the persistence of political violence in American life. Despite all the security measures, despite all the precautions, leaders remain vulnerable. The Secret Service had learned lessons from Dallas, but those lessons were not sufficient to prevent what happened in Los Angeles. The pattern repeated, the protection failed, the violence succeeded, and perhaps most painfully, Robert Kennedy's assassination reveals the cruelty of repetition. For a family to experience this kind of loss once is devastating. For them to experience it twice is almost unbearable. For a nation to watch it happen twice is traumatizing in ways that continue to reverberate decades later. If you had been alive in June 1968, if you had been watching the returns from California, if you had felt the hope that Robert Kennedy seemed to represent, and then if you had watched that hope die in a hotel hallway in Los Angeles, what would you have felt? Would you have maintained hope that political change was possible? Would you have continued to believe that leaders could emerge who would address injustice and division? Would you have kept faith in democratic processes and institutions? Or would you have become cynical? Would you have concluded that the system was rigged against change, that violence always wins, that hope itself is naive? These are not abstract questions. They are questions that people in 1968 had to answer for themselves. They are questions that shaped how an entire generation understood politics and possibility. They are questions that continue to resonate today, Because what Robert Kennedy's assassination asks us to confront is this: what do we do when hope is repeatedly struck down? What do we do when the leaders who advocate for justice are killed? What do we do when violence seems to be more powerful than the democratic processes we claim to believe in? Do we give up? Do we become cynical? Do we retreat into private life and abandon the public sphere? Or do we continue? Do we find new leaders? Do we rebuild the movements? Do we refuse to let violence have the final word? Do we insist against all evidence that change is still possible, that justice is still worth fighting for, that hope is not naive but necessary? These are the questions that Robert Kennedy's life and death continue to ask us. These are the questions that define what it means to be politically engaged in a world where progress is never guaranteed and violence is always possible. And these are the questions that we must each answer for ourselves, knowing that our answers will shape not just our own lives, but the kind of society we collectively create.